Let's talk about factory farms. Now, when I first heard that term, probably like you, it brought up a lot of negative connotations. Combining factory with farms, it makes you think that these animals are raised in factories. You have visions of animals in cages being cruelly treated. I'm now convinced that that kind of reaction is completely intentional. So as a veterinarian, for the past 37 years, I've seen animal abuse, and I've been called in by law enforcement many times to help them deal with that. But I've never seen it on a commercial livestock operation. It's always been an isolated, disturbed individual. When I read that over 70% of cattle and more than 98% of all pigs and more than 99% of all poultry in the United States are now being raised on these factory farms, well, I call BS on that. See, I've studied animal agriculture for decades, both in the US and internationally, so I'm very familiar with the industry. According to the US Department of Agriculture, 89% of all farms are considered small farms, not large farms, but small farms, 89%. The average US beef operation consists of just about 40 cows, like this one, about 40 cows on 2,000 acres. The USDA reports that 98% of all farms and ranches are family-owned. Family farms, family-owned ranches, just like this one also. So I looked into those statements, and here's what I learned. If you do a search on the definition of factory farm, you'll find page after page after page from animal activists who will tell you just how cruel they are and how bad they are and how they must all be stopped. But what you will not find is a clear, quantifiable definition of exactly what constitutes a factory farm. There are dictionary definitions explaining how we use the term, but not a specific measurable definition of what exactly makes a farm a factory farm. That doesn't make any sense, right? Because if more than 70% of cattle and more than 98% of pigs and 99% of poultry are said to be raised on factory farms, you have to precisely define what makes a farm a factory farm. I also ran into other equally undefined terms like corporate farms and industrial agriculture, but factory farms seems to be the most popular one at the moment. One animal rights publication, Green Queen out of Berkeley, openly states that there is no internationally agreed upon definition of what factory farms are. In the end, the term factory farms really has no specific meaning. It's used as a kind of a chameleon term, right? That is stated to be one thing, and then later on, it's stated to be something completely different. So it seems like it's simply a term, a survey-tested phrase designed to create negative connotations towards farming and ranching. In these publications, they then equate factory farms to AFOs and to CAFOs as if they're synonymous. An AFO simply stands for an animal feeding operation. An AFO means an animal feeding operation, and it's a regulatory term created by the USDA in 1998 to formally define what we would commonly call a farm. A farm is an AFO, an animal feeding operation. That's simply what it is. Now, a CAFO is another regulatory term, this time not created by the USDA, but by the EPA in its responsibility to regulate water quality. A CAFO is simply an AFO, a farm, that's been recognized by the EPA as being a potential source of surface water contamination. That's it. That's what a CAFO is, nothing more. Simply stated, if an AFO, a farm, meets certain conditions, such as being near any waterway, such as a creek or a ditch or a stream or a river, even if it has a drain pipe, like, this place here has creeks in these draws that come down this pasture. Eventually, there's a river at the bottom. Like this, it can be labeled by the EPA as a CAFO. So an AFO is just a farm, and a CAFO is a farm seen by the EPA as potentially a source of surface water contamination. The definitions for both AFO and CAFO say absolutely nothing about factories, about animal numbers, animal density, animal welfare, animal treatment, care, whether they're indoors or outdoors, whether they're in cages or buildings. There don't even have to be buildings. It says nothing at all about those. Only if you relabel all AFOs and CFOs, which are all just farms, as factory farms, can you then say that more than 70% of cattle and more than 98% of pigs and 99% of poultry now come to us from factory farms. And the reality is that they are just coming from farms. the overwhelming majority of which are family farms and family-owned ranches. So what's a factory farm actually look like? Well, right now we're at an AFO that has creeks and rivers nearby, which could then be labeled as a CAFO. So what's a factory farm? Well, apparently you've been looking at one this entire time. The straight truth, though, is that AFOs and CFOs are simply farms and ranches, and that's the bottom line. But keep in mind where this is coming from. The bottom line goal for these animal activists is to eliminate meat consumption. The problem for the activists is that public opinion for ranchers and farmers is very high, especially for family-owned farms and family-owned ranches. If these activists can convince people that they are all just cruel factory farms, then they've really gone a long way towards achieving their goals. The problem for farmers and ranchers is that only now about 2% of the population today is involved in production agriculture. Few people have significant connections to the industry, and so most people lack the background and perspective to realize that we're simply being manipulated. And that campaign has been very successful, by the way. So right now in Sonoma County, California, there's a ballot initiative to eliminate and ban all quote-unquote factory farms, when what they'll actually be doing is simply banning farms and ranches, mostly family farms and family-owned ranches.